Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today. Now, with less than a month until the release of F1 Manager 2022, F1 Manager, the account, they've released a blog post about some tips for the game, and I thought it would be quite useful to kind of go through them, discuss them a little bit, and show some new gameplay that they've been uploading over the course of the last couple of weeks. They've been doing these really cool little feature trailers, which do offer a bit more insight into the game than the gameplay we've already seen before in a video I've done previously. If you haven't seen that, by the way, then check it out. There'll be an annotation on the top right or link in the description to that previous video, because that was our very first gameplay of the game at all, basically. But yeah, so we're going to go through 6 top tips from the game developers and the account themselves about how we should be getting on with the game at the start, and it might give us some insight, to be honest, about where to look into, because you've got to think that obviously, you know, it is hopefully going to be quite authentic to real life, but there are going to be certain game mechanics that maybe are specific to the game that we're going to have to look at, and so this blog post might open a bit of insight into that. So number 1 is going to be running the numbers. So their first tip is going to be actually looking at your budget for the season and paying attention to that. Of course, like in real life Formula 1, the cost cap is now a new thing and is in this game, so there is a maximum amount of spending that every team can do to impact the car's performance. There is a budget that you as a team will have then outside of that. So, you know, let's say you're Ferrari or Red Bull, you're probably going to have more money than the cost cap, but the cost cap only covers stuff to do with the car, so you can still spend the money in other areas, you know, driver salaries, you know, spending on, you know, recruiting, and also your actual facilities, etc. You can spend on that and, you know, invest in infrastructure basically with the team. But in terms of when it comes to your actual car development, there's a certain amount, and that's why you're seeing in real life teams really budgeting and planning, you know, maybe bigger packages but less of them, or trickling them in very, very small updates because they cost maybe a little bit less to do each time. So there's different ways to go about it, but there's a whole finance tab on this game where you can see things like season balance, projections, incomings, outgoings, get a clear picture of that with all color coding of green and red. So as is the case in the main Formula 1 game from Cody's, you know, with My Team Career Mode, against the same sort of thing. You know, you've got to actually be able to afford everything, and you need to kind of budget for that and plan it in the future. You can't just kind of have a narrow mind of, okay, the next 2 months I want to do this, because you might want to upgrade something down the line at the end of the season, and if you don't have the budget for it, then your plans kind of fall apart. Number 2 is stay on the objective. So this is all about your actual board and, you know, what your goals are for the season. So there is a board of directors in this game, so they are going to tell you if they're happy or not with what you're doing. Those goals go from like a whole season, or even long term. Actually, there's actually a long-term goal that sometimes your board will set of getting to the championship within like 3-4 years. So that's a kind of overarching big goal. Then you have the season goal, and then you may have month-to-month, races to races, because each time you go into a race, you can choose your objectives, your sponsor bonuses, and that will also play into how much income you get, or you could lose if you don't reach those things. At the start of the save, the blog says you'll have an objective for the upcoming season, a long-term one to hit. So if you're running a team towards the back of the grid, a season objective could be to finish 8th or above in the Constructors' Championship, whilst your long-term objective may be to be a regular podium contender. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the championship. Your long-term goal could actually be something a little bit more specific, like podium runners. Number 3, sign on the dotted line. So a key long-term aspect of F1 Manager 2022 is recruitment. So this is nothing new from management games. If you've watched my channel before with other F1 Manager games, you'll know that recruiting the best talent is always so key, especially when you're trying to do a road to glory by bringing a team from the bottom to the top. There is going to be a point where you maybe even look at poaching, you know, team principals, race engineers, whatever, head of aero from rivals, or just obviously the actual pool that you can recruit from in the game. You know, they got real life engineers from all the teams basically, and familiar names potentially if you know and you know a bit more about the teams in the sport basically. And then obviously the drivers as well. We've got F1, F2 and F3 drivers, and I actually spoke about this before on a stream with F1 Manager. I was kindly invited onto a stream with him, and we're talking about, you know, maybe, you know, you've got a kind of 2 ways of looking at it. You can maybe go for a big name signing, and, you know, that's going to do the job for you straight away. You know, you sign whoever it is. Let's say, I don't know, maybe like a more experienced driver like you know, Fernando Alonso, or, you know, Sebastian Vettel. He's retiring out of Formula 1 in real life at the end of this season, but you can sign him in the game, and maybe, you know, he's going to give you an initial, you know, wealth of experience, you know, going to be able to get you some points, but then obviously, you know, he's on the older side of things, so he may retire at any point basically. So you may may want to also scout then an F3 driver or an F2 driver, get them into your team, and just have them as a reserve driver, and then you can actually build them up whilst putting them in free practice 1 sessions and building up their stats that way. So there's a bit of way you can play about it in terms of, do you want to try and build up a youngster, or do you just want to sign a hotshot name or a big name, or probably for a lot of people maybe your favorite driver in Formula 1, you just want to sign them to a different team maybe and just try and create like a weird scenario, like Red Bull sign Sebastian Vettel back to Red Bull, for example, or I don't know, sign someone else to Ferrari. There's a lot of different combinations to go with. And then also, once you've got your drivers and staff, there's also the added caveat of you actually need to be able to retain these people, because AI teams may come and try and poach them off you. So you need to make sure you're offering them a good contract close to expiring, and watch out for that, because AI, well, I'm hoping the AI will be just as aggressive maybe as trying to poach people that you've got that may be good. Number 4, just in case, this one is about spare parts. So this is quite a big thing, because this is very different to any mechanic I've ever seen before in racing management games, and even we've never had to deal with anything like this in the main Cody's game, is spare parts basically. So now there is a warehouse in this game, and you can make additional spare parts of your design. So the way it works in this game with R&D and development, you can't just make your design and that's it and you've got the part. You need to design the part and then actually then go into manufacturing and make it, which takes a bit more time, and you also need to then decide if you're going to spend in order to get those spare parts. So this again goes back to point number 1 of working with a cost gap. You need to think also, you need to budget in, like, okay, I might want 1 spare part, because you never know what happens if your driver crashes in the race. If you don't have a spare part to hand, then you're going to be in a bit of trouble basically. So you need to make sure you have maybe at least 1 or 2 spares. Maybe if it's like a new upgrade, you only bring 1 spare, or you don't bring a spare. We've seen that before in real life Formula 1, where teams have brought an upgrade and their driver stuffs it in the wall in FP1, and then that's it. They have to revert back to the old car because they don't have another part, or they need to ship one out ASAP. So it's a balancing act of spending the money on that, and then also just taking the risk of, if you've got a more experienced driver, or your driver is, very aware of his surroundings on the stats, then maybe you aren't going to be so worried about that. But the warehouse is going to be an important place for you to, manage that. Number 5 is using the race info provided to you in the game before every single race. So there's a race tab that you go to before you actually go into the race weekend, and that has quite a lot of useful info potentially. Things like, safety car chances, which is quite an important thing. You go to a race like Singapore, and that there's probably going to be 1 safety car in that race, probably. The odds are very, very high. So you're going to maybe want to factor that into maybe the fuel load you put in the car, how much you push the drivers on the fuel at the start of the race, potentially, because you can maybe then save it back in that safety car period. Also, strategy-wise, in terms of, is it going to be like a 1-stop, 2-stop, even 3-stop, or whatever, or the chance of rain, previous, performances by teams, and just giving you that historical data. You can check the tyre compounds offered by Pirelli and see like the expected temperature of the Grand Prix and the chance of rain from Friday to Sunday. So you can see just not the historical data, but the actual now and then, what's the forecast looking like. So, if it's maybe expected to be hotter temperatures, that is going to overheat the tyres. So maybe you want to go for, you're going to have to go for harder selection of tyres in the race, and that the strategy is probably going to end up being like a medium to hard rather than using the softs at all or whatever, because the track temps are really hot, or vice versa. If it's raining, obviously that then throws a whole nother curveball into it. And you can also see how your car is going to suit the track, so you can use that also, not just to see, okay, what's this going to be like for our team today on this one race, but you can actually use this in tandem with your upgrading. So you can actually look at the race tab down the line and look at tracks down the line, and let's say at a point in the season you think you want to bring an upgrade, you can just check if the upgrade you're going to bring is actually going to suit this circuit. So you can very easily kind of look at almost like a bit of a cheat sheet of just kind of seeing, like, does it tick all the boxes if it's going to suit this circuit. So okay, well, I'll plan to bring this upgrade in at that time, and I can budget for it at that time. So in 2 months time, I know I'm going to need this much money to manufacture this new design that I want for this specific circuit, and you can do that all via the race tab. And number 6 is called Crew Love. Whilst you individually manage your team's drivers, technical chief, head of aerodynamics, and 2 race engineers, F1 Manager 22 also includes the ability to manage your wider engineering team. So you've got these big kind of headline names and headline people that you're signing, but then there's also underneath that layer, you'll see in the gameplay that there's just an engineering team that you can assign to speed up manufacturing, speed up design processing. So you also need to develop that, and you need to improve and expand on your team, so you can actually invest in getting running a bigger team, so let's say you want to design 2 things in tandem maybe, or you want to get things done quicker. If you have a bigger team, like let's say you start off with one of the top teams like Red Bull, you're going to have a bigger engineering team versus, you know, maybe Williams down the bottom. They're going to have a small engineering team, so you need to actually invest in that as well. It's kind of almost, I liken it to the HQ facilities in the normal Cody's game. Like, you know, you need to be able to get to level 2 to actually have simultaneous upgrades and stuff like that. It's kind of the same thing, but this is a bit less simplified. This is kind of more actual, like it would be in real life. You need the actual number engineering staff to actually do the work. And the way you're going to invest in that team is investing like things like the design center upgrades, which will improve the maximum capacity of your teams and how many parts can also be worked on. So that's also another thing. Like, if you can't even work on a set number of parts, it doesn't matter how big your engineering team is, you need to have the ability to actually even do those simultaneous parts at the same time. So those are 6 initial tips according to the game makers themselves, you know, in terms of what we should be looking at the start of the game. Hopefully you guys enjoyed lots of the gameplay. Whilst we've been talking about that, as I said, they've been doing a series of these little kind of feature trailers which show a little bit of insight into specific parts of the game. So if you haven't watched them already and you want to kind of actually hear what they're talking about, then I recommend going over to their YouTube channel and seeing it. And obviously we are less than 1 month out, so I'm kind of hoping at some point, maybe in the next couple of weeks, I will be able to show you guys further early gameplay and insight. Maybe, I don't know. I think hopefully I will be able to, but I can't guarantee that. I've not heard anything quite yet, but obviously the excitement is building because, you know, I think this is going to be a really breath of fresh air for a lot of us that do enjoy this style of game. To have that alongside the main F1 game is going to be really, really sick, and it comes at a great time in the middle of August, you know, during the F1 summer break, so that's going to be really great timing. So guys, if you have enjoyed this video though, and if you go on to, you know, come back to this video maybe in the future when the game comes out and you end up finding it informative and useful, then be sure to hit that like button. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you're new around here, then do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.